So I would like to introduce our moderator, Jill Cooper. Jill has been in many aspects of the energy industry for years, as has the other ladies. You're going to hear a variety of topics from them, and we'll open for questions if we have time, right? One of the reasons we started this session is to not only hear from women and how they perceive this sector of energy, but to also garner information as to how to maneuver going forward and how young women need to think about their pathways, both educationally and professionally. One of the things that I've heard that really resonated with me and made me care a lot more was when I heard that if a young lady at the third grade is discouraged from being in math, science, engineering, and that kind of a sector, that they probably will never be in that pathway of education nor in her profession. And so I think it's imperative that we work with younger women as well as mid-career and on. And we're going to have an announcement following this panel of how we're going to do that in a very practical way. So let me introduce Jill Cooper. Come on up, and if you want to stand, or you can take it from there, however you'd like to. Please welcome Jill. Yeah, those are on.
Thank you, everyone. It is a true honor when Maury asked me to chair this particular group. I'm the least important person and least interesting person up here, so we're going to get right to the panel. First, if you noticed when they were asking us to move chairs up, all of us work in the energy industry somehow, and none of us felt like we had been trained properly for safety reasons to carry chairs up these stairs. So we all stood there and waited for the people that were properly trained to do it. So thank you for all of those that helped out. We actually were having that conversation there. And secondly, we have an amazing group of professionals here. We have engineers, 2 engineers. We have an environmental and safety. Well, Jennifer, your degree is environmental health sciences. We have a teacher organizer, Maggie, who's been in the environmental community for years, and we also have somebody from Xcel Energy. You heard her name several times today already, and she actually has an MIS background and has worked in the finance revenue side of the world. So it's quite a fascinating group of professionals. What we're going to do is each of them are going to take 3 to 5 minutes to tell you something about themselves and their career, and then we have several questions which are going to be posted up above. Their bios are all in the documents you have in front of you. I think they are pages 13 and 14 if you want to read more about them. But we'll go ahead and get started. Would you like to start?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alice Jackson. I am president of Xcel Energy Colorado. And for those of you in the audience, I never in a million years thought I would actually be working in a utility. And at this point in time, I have less years working inside of a utility than outside of it. But one day, I do hope to retire from a utility, and hopefully we get to talk about that probably a little bit more this evening as I have the opportunity to come back and speak to you in the keynote session right before the end of the day. I've been with Xcel Energy for a little over 8 years. For those of you less familiar with my company, we are a vertically integrated investor-owned utility that operates across 8 states. And if you imagine the central United States, we go from the upper border in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, down through Wisconsin, over to Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Colorado, Texas, and New Mexico. So we have that nice middle swath. And unbeknownst to us, when we formed the company like this, we have really prime wind and sunshine in pretty much all of those states. I would say less intense sun up north than we do down south here, but lots of interesting opportunities that has led us to be able to make the changes and the transitions that we've been able to do over these past several years. So looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today here with all these wonderful ladies, and hope you're enjoying the summit.
Is this? Yeah. Hi, I'm Maggie Fox, and I'm the principal in my own consulting firm called Maggie Fox Strategies. It took me months to agree that my name could be the name of it. I thought that was a bit ridiculous, but I was persuaded differently. I've had a long and glorious career in and running large organizations in the environmental movement, and I've loved every minute of it. I think one of the questions that Jill asked us was to sort of reflect on what we might say to young women and men coming into their professional lives at this point. And I think the panel before us was a good predicate to that. The reality is, when I started my career, it was in a time of enormous upheaval in the United States. Here we are. And in the world, but particularly in our country. And I made a decision at that point that I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wanted to be in the middle of making a difference, and that I wanted my work and my personal values to be completely aligned in whatever I did. This generation coming into the professional life are clear about that, and I think it's a pretty wonderful way to shape their lives. I've been very lucky. Every job I've had, I've loved. Some of them have been long, some have been short, some have been medium, but all of them have been in service of my values and the goals that I think we need as a country and as a world. So those of you who believe at this moment that everything is possible, I'm right with you.
Hello. Is it on? Okay. Hi, my name is Dina Lund, and I am the Executive Vice President of Operations and Engineering for Sterling Energy. We're a small midstream company that operates in Northeast Colorado. We gather and process gas and deliver NGL to the pipeline and deliver natural gas for sales. I have been in the industry for 30 years, and I absolutely love it to this day. And I think if I was to say something to a young person, I would say that being in an energy-driven career, because of its abundance and because of its affordability, it actually makes our lives great. And that's one of the exciting things about being able to be a person that knows that what I do for a living is actually powering our country and powering our world, and how we make our lives wonderful in terms of being able to barbecue, being able to have a hot shower in the morning, and being able to turn on the lights and have them be there. And also providing great jobs for people. That's one of the things that brings me a lot of value. From a perspective of what I would tell a young person who's looking at a career in the energy industry, is that if you are a purpose-driven person, if you are somebody who wants to bring value to the world through your career, that a job in the energy industry is actually a great way to do that. And from the first part of my career, I remember I did a project back in 1993, so memorable because I was pregnant at the time with my second child. And during this project, we were able to reduce the waste on a filtration system at a gas processing facility by over 50 tons a year. That project has been now in service for well over 20 years. And to be able to have those milestones in your career of the things that you're doing and have an impact on the environment and the industry and the air and your neighborhood, those are things that bring value to me in my career and the enjoyment of what I do.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Guidry. I'm the Vice President of Global Health, Safety, and Environment for Precision Drilling. We're a contract land drilling company. We offer drilling contract services as well as completions and production. Now that I've been sitting here thinking about it, I've been in oil and gas for more than half of my career, which is slightly depressing because that just means I'm getting older and older. So I actually started my career doing environmental remediation. We were contractors for Department of Energy and Department of Defense. My parents were extremely disappointed in my career choice. They wanted me, first to be a pharmacist. They just thought that evidently I had the personality for a pharmacist. I'm not sure how I should take that. Then when I broke the news to my mother that I was indeed not going to be a pharmacist, she thought that I should be a nuclear engineer because working on a tethered nuclear Navy submarine, I think, was very fascinating to her, but not me. So I didn't do either of those things. I did a lot of work when I started out on cleaning up the Foos Rap and Superfund sites. I say that oil and gas found me. I moved to Houston, and the oil and gas industry found me. I'm actually was not a safety professional by trade, but I think the environmental and the ESG piece is what kind of gravitated me towards there. Dovetailing on what Dina said, one of the things that I find most exciting about this industry is the amount of cutting edge innovation that is happening all the time in our industry, and the amount of collaboration that we have among our quote-unquote competitors, and then with our customers, our operating customers. I actually stepped out of oil and gas about 5 years ago because I wanted to go to a more stable commodity, which is water, which I didn't think through that one very well at all. But I stepped back into oil and gas because I missed the innovation. I missed all of the technology. I missed the pace, all of the really neat things that companies and that people are doing. And, you know, I'm proud to be in the industry and fortunate to be here today with you.
Hello, I'm Barbara Bergerson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Permian EOR Business Unit for Occidental Petroleum Company. Well, I'll start my venture. I grew up in Ohio, knew nothing about oil and gas, and I have been in oil and gas for coming up on 40 years, so yes, I am getting old. But yeah, I grew up, my dad was an electrical engineer. He designed transformer towers, and I really learned not to like them because we used to go and look at them. And so I said, okay, I thought I was okay in math and science, so I thought, okay, I'll go and become a math major. And my dad needed one engineer in his life because my brother went law, my other brother went business, and I was the youngest. He said, what about engineering? And I just looked at him and said, okay, I like chemistry, I'll do chemical engineering. He said, okay. And so that's how I fell into it because of my dad. And again, I did like math and science. I went to the University of Virginia and majored in chemical engineering, and after that I went to Shell in New Orleans, offshore. I really wanted to be on a platform. You know, you make these decisions in life, you sort of wonder, you look back and go, why did I pick that? But it's because I wanted to go on a platform. And you know, I worked as an offshore production engineer, then I was a foreman offshore, and I was, you know, first of all, at Shell, there was another female engineer, I remember that, because this is 1979, and there were no female managers. Then I was a reconditioning foreman offshore, and I was the only female on the rig of maybe 200 people. And, you know, and I learned a lot. I can tell you, you take assignments like that to really grow your technical skills and your personal skills, and it was a great learning. And throughout my career, I found out that every time you take a new job, it may not be your favorite one, but it's one you're always going to learn from. So I went from Shell New Orleans, Shell Bakersfield, came back to Houston, and eventually became Oxy in 2000. Along the way, I met my husband, had 3 children, and one of the things that was asked, what are some advice or what are some challenges you've had? And that's obviously work-life balance. That's always an interesting decision for any, nowadays, male or female. So I did turn down some management jobs along the way. I just didn't feel like I could handle the personal and the professional life at that time. And Oxy was very good, and it was Shell Oxy. And when I was ready, I said, you know what, I got this under control. I want to become in management. And obviously it didn't happen, you know, the next day, but I worked on my leadership skills and eventually became in management. So I think on the work-life balance, I would say just communicate with your spouse, communicate with your organization, and hopefully that all works out. But right now, I work in the Permian fields. It's West Texas and New Mexico. It's all water flooding and carbon dioxide flooding, or EOR CO2. And it's a really challenging time right now because we don't have a lot of extra CO2. But what's happening? A lot of carbon sequestration technologies are coming out to help us get more CO2. So we can combine all the carbon capture, utilization, sequestration with my business. So we have formed a new company, and that's right now really getting into a lot of the new technologies that are coming out. So anyway, I'm passionate about the industry I've had, and I would like to say that I've had success both personally and professionally.
Thank you. So we are going to go right into the questions, and we came up with these questions together. I Not sure I have to advance the slide or not, but the first question for the panel is, what difference does it make or not to have more women in leadership roles in the energy field? And we can just start down this way, then we'll come back the other way.
Great. So I am a strong believer in diversity and inclusion. So we all have been talking about this. We know those are buzzwords that are in all of our companies and our businesses right now. But I think really what it comes down to is that diversity of perspective. When you're sitting on a team and as a leader inside of my organization, I don't want a lot of people sitting around the table when I make a suggestion or bring an idea or start talking about a vision for our company for everybody to go, oh yeah, that sounds great. What I want is to have a dialogue. I want people to have different opinions. I want them to bring their perspectives from their background, their lifestyle, their experiences that they've had throughout to the table to have that dialogue. Because number one, I know I'm not the smartest person in the room. Number two, I need that diversity of feedback so that I can look at the perspectives around the table. And so when I look at this question, I think about having more women in leadership. To me, that's bringing more perspectives to the table to have that dialogue. And whether it's the executive team sitting around and talking about, should we do a different parental leave procedure or policy for the entire company, or is it, should we move into this business or purchase this company, or what do we need to do to address the financial situation we're facing, that diversity brings value. And so when it comes to having more women around that table, I think that adds to the diversity of the conversation, the perspectives that are bringing out, and it increases the opportunity. And there's also proof in the pudding. If you look at some of the studies that have been done out there, the companies that have a broader diversity of people around the table, inclusive of women at that table, they have higher financial returns. They have higher growth perspectives that are coming from those companies. So it not only benefits the company from a financial perspective, I think strongly that it benefits the company from a long-term future. What I would amend to this particular question as well is it's not just about women. Some of it has to do with age as well. And so having that diversity of age as people are coming out of universities, finding a way to include that in the dialogue and getting different perspectives from the different generations inside of the company also helps as well. Now, not everyone's going to be ready for leadership on day one. And so that just means finding the opportunity to have that dialogue. But I think that's the perspective that I would bring to. It's good to not only have women, it's good to have that diverse mix of perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences in order to develop a really strong company.
Well, you could just take care of that question. Nice job, Alice. I think I'll take it from a slightly different perspective. The word leadership, unfortunately, often misses out on the understanding of the word management. And there's no leader that emerges in any sector, whether it's energy or anything else, that actually hasn't learned how to be a manager or should have. And so when you raise questions about diversity of perspective, that immediately calls to mind the ability to understand and build a team, and a team that serves the purposes of its goals, no matter where it is in the enterprise. So some of the characteristics that I think women, as more than half of the population, bring to every conversation and every endeavor are a couple of things that men also have but don't seem to have easily access. One is emotional intelligence. I've only fired a few people in my career, but in each instance, one of the underlying reasons was an absence of an emotional intelligence, a complete inability to understand the workings of the particular enterprise, whether it was an international campaign, a national campaign, a political, or legal, it doesn't really matter. Emotional intelligence is actually probably one of the most fundamental aspects of a clean, clear working team, which is another sort of viewpoint on perspective. In addition to that, I think it's not that men don't have emotional intelligence, but it's often viewed by them as a soft skill and not one that they need to necessarily share or bring to the fore in their own leadership capacity, which is a tremendous mistake. The other, I think, critical thing about women is a predisposition to problem solving in the context of collaboration. Problem solving comes in a lot of different ways, through competition, winning, or in the case in working inside an endeavor through collaboration. Men are collaborative, women are collaborative, but women more generally seek that choice in terms of problem solving as a first element of decision making rather than as a third or fourth. The other characteristic I think that's very critical is that women, and I'll give you a couple of anecdotes. When I took the job of Deputy Executive Director of the Sierra Club, there had never been one. So of course I sat down with the Executive Director at the time, and after we'd been working together for about 2 or 3 months, he turned to me in the middle of a meeting and said, "Oh, we're going to have a relationship." Hello? It wasn't in any way an innuendo. It was an actual lack of awareness that you couldn't possibly operate in that way as a team, as an executive director and a deputy without a relationship of some sort of understanding of goals and vision and execution and different styles and where they fit and where they flow and where you might need to put time into it. The second anecdote is equally as interesting in the context of, well, I don't know if I'm even going to tell it, actually, now that I think about it. There have been journeys along the way where the differences between men and women are humorous and delightful, and sometimes where they're painful. And where they're painful often is in the context of the term I use, which is attunement. Attunement is another thing that women bring in through our biology, I believe. And that is the constant awareness of what's happening in any given room. And for many people, that is a subtle skill. And those who are successful need to be able to be attuned, to actually have a sense of what's happening in a small room, a big room, or even between two people. And I think women come to that attunement quality as just a part of being born. Many of us nurture it because we rely on our instincts and our intuition. Others don't, but it's always present. And I think that attunement is what makes women particularly critical in leadership and management roles, because that is when you understand your team and invite them to understand you and work together collaboratively to solve whatever challenges present themselves. I don't mean to say that these traits are exclusive. They're not, but I do, to one sex or the other. But I do believe women bring those traits naturally to every circumstance, as well as understanding their own limits. And the last thing I'd say to young women who are, or really any of us in our careers, is, as you were speaking of about work-life balance, is the notion that in whatever endeavor you're in, the first and most important responsibility you have is to know yourself. Who I am, what I believe, what I do, what I care for, who I care for, and how that is relevant to this team. Interestingly enough, the strongest leaders and the strongest managers are those who have the best sense of self-knowledge, both in terms of their capacity to do anything and their limits. And I think women are particularly focused on understanding who they are and what they bring and can bring to any endeavor.
Wow, that was awesome.
I know they're going to run it. Now what?
So I'm going to give you my thoughts on this topic and some advice that I got before I moved into this executive role. And I knew that I was going to be leaving my former company, and one of my mentors was a woman at a very high executive level at a large oil and gas company, and she said, when you move on to your new company and you're a member of the senior management team, you have the ability to affect the whole entire culture of the company. And that is an awesome responsibility. What are you going to do about that? And so those are the thoughts that I had in my head when I stepped into the door to meet my new teammates and to meet the people in the field that were on my team and the people that were in the office on my team. And so one of the first things I started doing was looking around and asking questions, and asking all sorts of questions. What's going on here? What are people doing? Who's in what role? How is this happening? And one of the first things that I noticed was that the people in my organization were working terrible schedules. They were working these schedules where they were working 12 days on and 2 days off, and they were at 50% overtime, and they were making under market wages, and they were ripe for people just running and screaming out of the company and going off to other companies where they could make more money and feel more accepted. So one of the very first things I did was go through and look at all of the teams and how they were organized and put together a schedule for these people where they could have dedicated weekends off, where they could be not on call, where they could make more money. And we ended up adding people to all of our teams, raising their wages, giving them new schedules, and saving the company money. It was incredible. And I took it to the CEO and I said, here's my plan. He's like, telling me you got to get overtime down, you got to manage costs, you have to do this. I'm like, I'm adding people, I'm doing this. And he goes, we can give people quality of life, we can give people more money, and we can do better as a company overall. I'm like, absolutely, we can make it happen. And I think women have the ability, and they're thinking through things, and they can create a sense of community. And I think that's one of the positive impacts that a lot of women bring to their job, is the idea that I bring a sense of community, I bring a sense of belonging, and the ability to inquire, like management through inquiry, where you're asking questions. People will tell you what's wrong with their organization. They'll tell you what they need to do. They'll even tell you where they're underperforming. All you have to do is listen and ask all those questions. And one of the things that we do to create a sense of community, because there's all sorts of diversity in our organizations. There's diversity of race, there's diversity of gender. There's also in our organization a diversity between people that are in blue-collar jobs and people that are in white-collar jobs. And making all those people feel like they're connected to part of the whole and that they're all contributing together to make our company work. And creating opportunities for that to happen by having picnics out into the field where we bring people from the Denver office out to the field. A couple years ago, we started Family Day, where we all go to the Rockies game together on the same day that they have Weather and Science Day at the Rockies, and people bring their children, and they have a nice event. But bringing that sense of community, and women also bring a sense of community about the environment. I might be in the oil and gas industry, and I don't think anybody's referred to us as the clean energy environment anytime here today. But I would like to say, and if you look at the policy changes and the things that have happened, I think former Governor Ritter even suggested it earlier today, that some of the biggest impacts we can make right now are improving environmental efficiency. Right? Those are some of the biggest impacts on our way to transitioning to another environment. And knowing that my team members are coming forward and saying, hey, we can reduce emissions if we do this. Hey, we can put some recycle in our systems, and if we do this, we can reduce our flaring. And projects that we never had to do for any regulatory reasons, we've been able to do, have a business impact, have an environmental impact, and make our team members feel like, hey, that was my idea and I contributed and I made something happen. And I think a lot of that, just the idea of bringing community to the companies and bringing community to your environment, and it's community impact internally, and employees feel engaged when you do that, and then that community feeling outside, when people come forward and they say, I want to sponsor, St. Jude's Hospital. I want to sponsor a softball team. I want to sponsor a trap shoot team. And, we make those things happen, and then they feel even a bigger part of their local communities.
So I was preparing for this panel, and I was doing some research on what diversity means, not just in gender, but race, but in thought. And I came across this one article that said, sociologically speaking, that women were conditioned from a very young age to collaborate and work in teams, and men were conditioned for competition. And I sat with that for a little bit, and then I brought it back into my current role, and I thought, oh, this is a really interesting case study. So precision drilling started in 1951. As a small family-run company, and and now is one of the world leaders in land drilling. And one unique thing about our company is that nobody in management has come from the outside, with the exception of myself and one other person. And so a couple of years ago, my company said, okay, we've got a lot of really hardworking people, but everybody in our company that's running our company is from our company. And if we're going to make a step change in our performance and in our footprint, we need some diversity of experience and diversity of thought. So I had a heavy service background and offshore background. So, yeah, you know, I was brought into the company. And everybody kept asking me, what's it like being a woman in a land drilling company? And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's just my job, right? But what was interesting as days and weeks and months and years have gone on, and going back to what I started with the sociological conditioning, the men that I work with are so intensely competitive. Like, they race about everything. Who's gonna get to the coffee first? Who's gonna go, who just got a new car and no, my blue is brighter blue than yours. I mean, I've never seen so much competition in everything, in their conversations, in their thoughts. Who's gonna, you know, oh, you've got a question, who's gonna answer it the fastest? And it's really ironic that I found myself in this position where I'm actually, I'm slowing people down, asking questions, and trying to get more, just different answers out of people, and trying to, you know, we've got all of this experience in our company, but we're losing it because people aren't speaking up, because there's this competition to get to the right answer fastest. And so we're losing a lot of that conversational brainstorming. And my husband thinks it's actually quite funny that I'm the voice of reason at work, trying to calm people down and trying to tell people there may be more than one answer. So that's what I thought about diversity, not only in thought, but really when I was thinking about gender, is we are just pre-wired to have certain qualities and characteristics. And so how can we, as people wanting to move our organizations forward, how can we all aid in that and support in that, being able to move us forward? I still find it very funny, though, because I am quite competitive, and I'll give you a real-life example. So I did not know that Barbara went to UVA until she just said that. And I went to Purdue. And I'm quite upset. I'm quite upset that UVA beat us in the Elite Eight, and I'm still harboring some small bit of resentment, but I will get over it because I am a collaborator. I am not competitive.
Okay, Alice, you were probably gonna, and I already said this earlier, you know, when you're in a panel and you're the fifth person, I liked all your answers, so very good. But, you know, I think, first of all, you know, I work for a company where the CEO is a female. She is the first CEO of a large energy company, so it sort of sets the stage. So my stage may be a little different than Jennifer's. So, you know, I think the big key is it's diversification, gender, race, and age is you really have to remember that. You know, even though they may not be like at the table, you got to get their opinions on everything because it's a whole new generation out there. So, you know, I agree with Jennifer. The competitiveness is interesting because I was just sitting here when you were talking thinking, God, I haven't answered all my texts today from all the Auburn people that we're playing on next Saturday. I'm thinking, oh, I don't even want to start this because the guys are all after me, you know. But, yeah, one thing about women in leadership, the concern you have, you say you want more women, and it comes down to where Mari was going. Only, when I started in engineering in 1975, about 25% of the engineering class were women. You know what? It's now 25%, 30%. It's not going up. So, you know, you just can't pull a leader at a young age, if we don't have them. So our big challenge here, if you want more diversification in engineering, in leadership, you got to start them at a young age. And I am completely in agreement with the third grade part. You got to work with the girls early. And I did a hands-on science for 6 years when my 3 kids did it. And you really just have to make it fun and make sure you have support from the parents there. And anybody who's have young kids, and whether it's male, female, you just got to encourage them in the math and sciences.
And I can tell you where I'm going to be Saturday night at 6:59 is watching the Spartans play. I'm not competitive either. I am going to switch it up, though, and start back the other way so people have a chance to answer first. So, Barbara, you're on again.
I'm competitive.
She already kind of led into this with her answer. What role do you feel leaders have in bringing along others in their careers, and what have others done for you, if you had a sponsor or a mentor or somebody?
Well, I think I've had sponsors along the way, and there really weren't too many. I can't even think I had a female mentor because there weren't any. But I mean, I had a lot of supportive men along the way, and they helped me with my leadership skills. They gave me honest feedback. One honest feedback, I still don't like the guy, even though he was right. At the time, I thought I wanted to be this leader, and he told me I wasn't ready. Again, still don't like him, but I had to look back, because it's not easy to hear. So that feedback was really important. And so any leader, going back to the second part, you need to give feedback to people. As a leader, what do they need to work on? You need to give them stretch assignments so that they can get better at what maybe they're weak at. You got to give them opportunities to network. You have to give them opportunities to branch out to something that they're not good at. And your job as a leader is to make sure that you have the next people to take your spot. And that is your role. And you need to, I have a lot of young people, especially young females, come and ask for lunch and just talk about things. That's my role, and that's my role as a leader.
And I would agree with that. The role of a leader for me has changed as my career has changed and I've taken on different opportunities, but definitely I think that primarily my role is to coach potential. I think it's been an interesting journey for me as the generations have changed. And I was thinking about what Barbara said about feedback. The style of feedback and the type of feedback that I give and receive has changed over the years. I have quite a range of men and women on my team. And I tell them all the time, you guys are going to make me schizophrenic because I have to talk to you this way, and then you this way, and then you this way. It's like, could you just put a sign on so I know who I'm talking to at this given moment, so I know what kind of feedback to give? But interestingly enough, I had a manager back, probably 15 years ago, who told me, so you're not going to make it in management. Oh. I said, why? He said, because you're too shy. I said, well, nobody's actually ever said that to me before, but okay, I'm listening. And it was interesting because I did not receive that feedback at the time. I just thought that that person didn't like me, and I did not receive that feedback. And as I kind of kept going on in my career, other people would say, hey, Jennifer, you need to speak up in meetings, or hey, we talked about that before. Why didn't you say that in the larger group, or different things like that, or why aren't you networking, and why aren't you going to these other things? And I was like, oh, geez, because I think I'm shy. So that feedback is really, really, really critical to receive and to give, and it's not always comfortable. I like everybody on my team, and it's really hard to look at somebody who's very eager and very smart and very dedicated and very committed, and to let them know where they're struggling and where they're challenged. But on the flip side of that, it's also my role to coach that potential for them, and to build that trust and let them know that they're supported and in an environment where they can grow into it. So I've been very fortunate that I've always had very public, visible champions, and I've realized later in life that I actually had a string of very secret champions that I really didn't know about until years later. And so really just building your brand and being who you are, so that people will speak of you and propose you for projects and get your name out there so that you can really shine. So that really finding those champions and those mentors has really been key for me.
Barbara, you told your story of somebody saying you weren't ready for leadership. When I was pregnant with my first child, I had just gotten a new boss, and I was going in for my performance evaluation, and my boss told me, he said, you know, you're really not cut out for engineering. And not only that, I think that having your baby is a really good time for you to just transition out of the work world. Women with young children should be at home with them. So that was the feedback that I got from my performance evaluation. It was very disappointing. It was very heartbreaking, and I knew that he was wrong. I knew that I was really good at what I was doing. I knew that I was really smart. I was always very smart, and I had to let that go. I did realize that I had to move into another group, that there wasn't going to be any opportunity for me under his leadership. I spent most of my career, I would say the first 20 years of my career, without any visible mentor of any kind in my career. Even though about 9 years in, I became a plant superintendent, and I have been managing people for over 21 years at this point. So for me, being a leader is to be a selfless person and to give to others in your organization, whether it's ever been given to you, to let them have the opportunity to explore their abilities, to let them have the opportunity to contribute, to let them have the opportunity to be seen and known for what they can accomplish, regardless of what part of the organization that they come from, regardless of if they're men or women or anything else. So that's a very, what has somebody done for you? It was very, very late in my career at my former company when I had an executive coach who came in and spent some time with me, and he told me, because I had spent most of my career out in the field. I was in Evanston, Wyoming for approximately 9 years at a very large gas processing facility as an on-site engineer. And then I became a plant superintendent at a field facility in Fort Lupton, Colorado. And so when I moved into the Denver office, I didn't know how to dress. I spent most of my career in boots and a hard hat, and my hair had just grown really, really long because it was just easier to put in a ponytail every day and not even think about my appearance. And so while mentally in my head I was a leader, how people viewed me was not necessarily that way. And this person was brave enough to tell me, people are misperceiving you, and you need to change fundamentally the way you look. He goes, because you're absolutely amazing. He goes, and I've worked with so many other leaders here, and so many of them have so many issues, and you don't have any. We just need to, clean you up. So that was probably the best advice that I had ever gotten, and it was absolutely helpful. And within a couple years of getting that advice, my total compensation had actually doubled. So I'm like, wow, okay, if I can cut my hair and put some makeup on and throw a heel on my foot and make a whole bunch more money, why not? And so that was a really helpful, thing for me. And so I didn't think about women's issues until around 2010, 2011, when my former company decided to create a women's network. And I looked at it as an opportunity for me it was one of the executive vice presidents was the executive sponsor, and I'm like, wow, who doesn't want to hang out with one of the executive vice presidents, right? I'm like, okay, so I think I need to get on that, committee. And then once I got on the committee, they're like, oh, we're going to have a chairperson. Who wants to be the chairperson? And I'm like, shoot, only the chairperson is going to spend time with the executive. I see this coming. Now I got to be the chairperson of this thing. And my children were teenage boys at the time, and they're like, wow, Mom, you never ever used your gender, to get ahead. I'm like, well, not using my gender hasn't gotten me anywhere, so maybe it's time to try something different. But it became spending time with these women. So, I mean, some really amazing women at my former company, and starting to think about, like, why are we getting ahead? Why are we not getting ahead? What's going on here? And how can we help each other as a community of women and as a community of people? And what are the types of skills and resources that we need to bring to ourselves? And really, it's about, I think, what was mentioned a little bit earlier. If only half of your people are being looked at for opportunities, half of your pipeline is gone. There's so much amazing talent out there that if you're not addressing and bringing that forward in the world, then you're missing on some incredible people and some incredible opportunities for leadership. So I don't work at that company anymore, and I've moved on to my current role. But that sense of community and sense of helping women is something that I've continued. And my company co-sponsors Lean In, and we have a topic every month. This is the 3rd year we've been doing it. And so once a month, I get to sit at a table with women I've never met before and talk about what's going on in their world and what's going on in their lives. And I've seen so many people just make so many strides in their career and opportunities just by having that little bit of advice. And being a leader isn't just being a leader in your company, but it's being a leader in your community as well.
You have great stories. You have really great stories. I think I would view this question as not just about women. It's about leadership and for men and women, and that is that I don't know that I've never had mentors per se, but I have had a number of people in my career who have reached out to me and sought to move me along without me really realizing that they were thinking in that way. But I have always watched powerful women and made my own decisions about who and how I wanted to lead by watching other women, some men, but primarily women, largely because I didn't particularly relate to the male leadership style as something I wanted to emulate. I'm competitive by nature. I didn't need more of that. And I wanted to be more of a woman. I'll tell you a great story. When I was getting a master's in education along the way, as a thesis, I was working in experiential education at the time and had a long and wonderful career at Outward Bound. And I decided to put together a trip for women leaders to see what women's leadership looked like. I was in my early mid-20s. And I was thrilled to put together a group of women from all over the United States. One was the CEO of a major marketing firm in New York. One was, at that time, the chief of staff to Governor Lamb. One was a PhD psychiatrist who taught in 3 different universities and had a private practice. These were very powerful women, and all of them a great deal older than I. And I put together a very rigorous course for them because I knew they were smart and tough. And then in order to get at the issues I wanted to talk about, I was going to have to push them physically pretty hard. And I did, and they were very collaborative for the first 48 hours. But as I pushed, their collaboration started to wear down. And I challenged them to have some conversations that they were unaccustomed to having, because in that point in their lives and in their careers, conversations between women were simply not safe. And it took an all-night walk, because I said, well, we'll either stop when you're ready to have these conversations or we'll just keep walking. And because they were fierce and strong and quite sure of themselves, we walked all night in Grand Gulch in Utah. And somewhere around 6 in the morning, the psychiatrist stepped in and said, I think I have a proposal here. We're all really tired. Let's see if we can have this conversation. So we did. And there were many, many wonderful things that came out of it, especially for a young woman who was well beyond her capacity at that moment, and even pretending to lead this group of women. But the most powerful memory I have was that each one of them in their journey to extraordinary leadership positions, and they all continued to do that throughout their careers, each one of them had only one reason they signed up to do this, because none of them needed it. And that was that they regretted that they had modeled themselves after men. That in the world of leadership at that point, that they didn't see that there was an option for leading in a different way. Those days are gone, but it was very formative for me. And so as I watched the world around me, as I made my choices, I chose women who actually understood that being a woman was their greatest strength, that they understood that their capacity to lead and their ability to lead had everything to do with their feminine strength and knowing themselves as women and as leaders and as collaborators and as fierce competitors and as people who were going to get major things done in the world. So I think you can have the gift of mentors or you can find them yourself. You don't have to wait for someone to actually choose you. You can choose them. And the other thing I think is that one of the delights for me of this period of my life is actually being a mentor, especially to the younger generation who are entering the world at a time when change is even more rapid than it's been in all of our lives. I keep looking at the title of this event, 21st Century Energy Transition. We're not just transitioning in the energy world. The 21st century is a systems change time frame. We're transitioning in everything. All roles that we play in the world as human beings is transitioning. Our relationship with life is in transition. So I think now is probably a more important time than ever to seek mentors even in late stages of your career, or be a mentor and serve those who need it, because the days ahead are far more challenging than many of the years behind us. And the kind of leadership we need and the kind of care we need for each other and for this planet is unparalleled in human history. And so this question for me is much bigger than about being a woman. It's about being a human being in the 21st century and bringing the best that you have. Sometimes that's by seeking your own opportunities for mentorship, and sometimes it's serving by being that for others.
So, such great stories. You know, I'm really impressed whenever I sit down on these types of panels, and there's so much connection. You know, there are great things as far as connection. There are some stories that I'm very glad I haven't had similar experiences to. I have not had a boss tell me that because I was having a child, I needed to leave the workforce. But you know, a couple of the things that come to mind just in hearing these stories today, I've had some remarkable experiences in regards to mentorship. And in fact, I think my greatest mentor was also my worst boss. And sometimes you find those diamonds in the rough and you have those experiences. This particular boss, the only way that I knew I wasn't doing a good job was if he stopped talking to me. And that's the only way you knew, is just he wouldn't talk to you for a couple of days. It's like, okay, what did I do wrong? And to this day, I'm still his longest standing employee, not with the company I'm with now. But you know, I also reflect on the fact he was also one of the greatest mentors I had. Not less than a month after I took the job with him, I had to go on bed rest for 15 weeks with my second child. That's a really hard position to go into. And the thing is that being the type of person I am, there was no way I was staying on bed rest for 15 weeks without a hell of a lot of stuff to do from that bed. Because there's no way you lay there and you do absolutely nothing. And I was able to work with him to find a path where I actually worked from that bed 30 hours a week. That was as much as my doctor would let me, but as long as I was flat on my back with the TV tray over the lap and the computer over the top of it until the bump got too round, you know, it all worked. And he was really accommodating to find that path. He's also the person that told me, it's time for you to leave this company and take the job at the next one. Because he saw the direction that I needed to go with my career and the opportunity that I had whenever Excel called and said, instead of tearing apart our rate cases, how would you like to try and put them together? Even though I was the person who was handling the majority of the procurement of energy and running a retail electric provider for this company, he saw the fact that I needed to go and do something else. And he said, I know it's going to hurt and make my job harder here, but you really need to take this job and you need to go and try it. It's not going to be easy. I was 33 years old stepping into a team of 13 people that the average age was 55. That's not an easy step to take when you're trying to move into a leadership role. And by the way, there were only 2 women of those 13. And so it was a very interesting step and approach to take. But through my career, one of the things that, quite frankly, I've had hit me now twice was in the first time that I took that job, within 6 months, I was given a Lifetime Achievement Award. I was like, I'm 33, I haven't done anything yet. But what I didn't realize is in Amarillo, Texas, I was the highest ranking female in that city ever. Ever. And so to me, that was the first time that I sat there and I went, wow, this means a lot more to other people than, quite frankly, I've taken the time to stop and think about it. Last May was the second time that this came up. Last May, I took the job as president of Xcel Energy Colorado. I'm the second female to hold this role in the state. And I'm also in the top 10 of women inside of the country leading significantly sized utility companies. And once again, I didn't realize how much it meant not just to me and my family, but it meant to the other women and the other employees of not only my company, but people in the surrounding area. And that's something I think we all, as women leaders, I don't know if you ladies have come across it in your career too, about you just have to stop and pause sometimes and go, this means more beyond just what it is that we're doing for ourselves and our family. It means more to the communities that are around us. And, as a mother of 4 sons with a husband who's a stay-at-home dad and works part-time, it's going to be an interesting dynamic as each of those boys grow up and they decide what their path is going forward. And they think about, what are their families going to be like? How is that balance going to come into play between themselves and their spouses? What is this environment going to be as we move forward? Because you're right, it's not just about us as women, it's about us as a working community and how are we going to move forward through time. But I also think it's incredibly important as leaders, as women leaders, to have a mentorship role, to sponsor those groups inside of the company where you can come together and continue to have dialogue, where you can continue to find and solve problems and move the path forward, not just from the, okay, where are you going to get your next earnings per share, but also how are those employees of the future going to engage? What are you going to do about these things? And what's on the minds of your employees that you need to address so that you can have a committed, a connected, and a well-performing environment in your workplace? Because you're going to be more successful when you can do those things. So great stories, ladies. It's been a lot of fun talking a variety of topics. I don't know if you're going to try and fit in one more question here.
Thank you. So for the audience, I'd just like to ask you guys, how many of you learned something new today from this group? How many of you want more of this? Yeah, no, we're out of time. I would like to thank these amazing, brave professionals. Honestly, your honesty, your candor, you're willing to show something unique about yourself and tell some kind of painful stories. It was really amazing, and I do think it helped everybody here. And so I want to thank you all so much.